Greetings. Glad that you can be with me today. I'm Steve Cole, the pastor of the First Methodist Church in Oswego, Kansas, and the West Mineral Methodist Church in West Mineral, Kansas. Today we're going to be looking at a sermon for August 6th, 2023, and looking at a passage from the Old Testament, a story about Jacob. Jacob was on his way back. He'd been living with his uncle Laban for several years and amassed quite a bit of property. But one of the reasons why he went to live with his uncle Laban is because he had kind of swindled his brother Esau out of his birthright. He dressed up to make himself look like his brother Esau and got a blessing from his father Esau. Later said he was going to kill Jacob for doing that, and so Jacob runs off, but he ends up 20 some years later, and he decides it's time. Well, actually he doesn't decide. God tells him, go back to your homeland, go back from where you came from. The trouble is when he goes back, Esau is going to be there, so he's got to confront Esau. But before he confronts Esau, he has another confrontation with someone else. Okay, Genesis 32, verses 22 to 30. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that the hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let go, for it is almost daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" Jacob answered, "Jacob," he answered. Then he said to the man, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, and because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." May God add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of his word. You know, there's a saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Yep, Jacob had a plan. He planned ahead that he was going to have all his possessions, everything he owned was going to go on ahead of him, and some of it he was going to give to Esau to appease Esau, so that maybe Esau would have not kill him. But you know, here he goes. He sends everything ahead. Instead of him being at the head of this procession that is going, Jacob stays back to the back and is kind of scared of what might happen to him. So, yeah, he's kind of hiding out a little bit. But while he's hiding out, he confronts this man, and we don't really know who the man is, although he says he wrestles with God. Now, was it? Some people would say it was an angel. Some people say it was just somebody that represented God. And some have even said it could have been Jesus, because Jesus is God in human form. But, of course, this was Old Testament, so hard to say. But whoever it is, this individual represents God. Now, Jacob, all his life, has been kind of lived up to his name, which means supplanter. And he's kind of been like that, what we might say, kind of like a con man most of his life. Early on in life, when Esau came in from hunting, he didn't have anything to eat, and he asked Jacob for something to eat. Jacob gave him something to eat, but he said, "First, give me your birthright." I have a lot to give for just a meal, but Esau said, "Okay, fine, you can have my birthright." Then later, when they're older, their father wants to give a blessing upon Esau. Esau was the oldest born. They were actually twins, but he was the firstborn. And so they find out about that. And of course his eyesight's not very good, so they dress Jacob up to look like Esau, and he gets the blessing. Well, this makes him mad. So, but God has come along after, say, 20 years and said, time to go back. And then, of course, in this time, he's married, has children, and lots of possessions. So, but God tells him to go back. So, he's on his way back. And this is what Jacob did. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom, and he instructed him, this is what you are to say to my master Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there until now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, maidservants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord, that I may find favor in your eyes. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, with 400 men with him. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. He's scared. He's afraid that he's going to lose these things. But what did God tell Jacob? He told him to return. And he gave him the same promise he gave to Abraham and Isaac before. You will be the father of a great nation. Then God promised this. Why should he be scared? Because he's human, just like any of the rest of us. He believes what God says, but he still has this little bit of doubt. So he sends wave after wave of gifts ahead on to Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels and their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds. He instructed them in the lead, when my brother Esau meets you and asks, to whom do you belong? And where are you going? And who owns these animals in front of you? Then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. Now, where should Jacob have been? Up front, leading this whole procession. Said he's in the back waiting for all this stuff to go on ahead of him. Yeah. He doesn't know what the next day is going to bring. Is he going to live or is he going to die? And so he's there. And it says he even sent his wives and his children on ahead of him. He is alone there in the wilderness. And what happens next? So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Wow. He does this. And of course we know that the man is representation of God. Have we ever done something like that? Have we ever wrestled with God? Maybe not physically, like Jacob did, but spiritually and emotionally, sure. Maybe all of us have it, one time or another. You know, there's a few times in my own life that I wrestled with God and what God was wanting to do. You know, one of them was I called into the ministry. At first, I didn't want to accept that. What, me? Be a preacher? I didn't think that was for me, but God kept, I had to wrestle with that for a while. Another time, had to leave the first church where I was the pastor. I really didn't want to do that, but it was like God wanted me to do something else. Another time was there was a lady that was part of the church, good lady, wonderful, and she was a home health nurse. went to the home of the person she was caring for. This lady's son just happened to be there at the same time, took a gun and shot and killed the gal that was the home health nurse. Why? God, why did you take this? This is a good lady. She's a wonderful person. Why would you let this happen to her? And then there was a young man, about 12 years old, riding his bike across the street, hit by a truck and killed. Why? Why would God let that happen? Or another lady that was a faithful member of the church for about 55 years old. Wonderful lady. Had an operation on her knee, died of a blood clot at 55 years old. Wow. We wonder about these things. And another is a young gal. She just graduated from high school. Cheerleader, very popular, nice, young, good-looking girl. But she decided to move to Kansas City and, got a job up there and was going to start a new life for herself there in Kansas City. But somebody came along and asked to give them a ride someplace. She's, willing to help. Didn't know this guy all that well, but okay, she'd give him a ride. Well, it turns out somewhere along the way, he took out a gun and shot and killed her. And you go, why, Lord? Why do these things happen? Wow. Of course, I can remember that there were times when I think one church where I was at one time, we had 5 people all at one time dealing with cancer. Why are all these people dealing with cancer? Now, I had an aunt that she had a struggle for a while. She had a brain aneurysm, but they told her it was inoperable. And one of these days, don't know when, that aneurysm would burst open and she would die. And for a few years, she lived in fear of what would happen when that brain aneurysm. And every time she got a headache, she was worried, is this the time? She worried about it. But after a certain amount of time, she came to the point, you know what? I'm going to enjoy the time I have. Not going to let it worry me anymore. And she did. And the thing is, she never died of that brain aneurysm. She died eventually, but not from the brain aneurysm. So it's hard to believe. Yeah, we all deal with those things once in a while. We wonder why God. We wrestle with God as to why things take place. And a lot of times we don't know the whole answer. And even David, if we look at some of the Psalms, a lot of times the Psalms say, God, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? Why am I, even the psalmist David said that a few times. So, yeah. So Jacob is wrestling with this man, and when he saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled with the man. Here Jacob is wrestling along, and he dislocates his hip. I kind of have a feeling, know what that's like. Not my hip, but my shoulder. Not too long after I went to Fort Scott, I dislocated my shoulder. When the EMTs came and they asked me, what's the pain on a scale of 1 to 10, I said 11. I'd never been in so much pain before in my life. So I wonder how in the world is Jacob going to keep wrestling now, with that pain. And it says that he held on and he wouldn't let go. Of course, what are you going to do? You've got to hold on. Otherwise, you're going to go down to the ground. Oh, wow. He says, I won't let go until you bless me. He evidently, at some point, realizes who he's wrestling with. I'm not going to. Hasn't he already blessed Jacob? Jacob's got all these possessions. He's got everything that he needs. What more blessing does he need But it says that he did bless him at that time. Yeah. Wow. So, even though Jacob had kind of swindled his brother out of the birthright and got the blessing from his father, Isaac, and he even had some moments with his father-in-law, Laban, where he kind of pulled some shenanigans, we might say, then too. But despite all these things, God still chooses Jacob to be one of the patriarchs. He doesn't punish him. He gives him a blessing. He shows him grace and mercy. Wow. What happens when he finally does meet up with Esau? The interesting thing is that he goes up there and Esau looks and he goes, where's all this come from? He says, well, it's all mine. And he says, and Esau ran to meet Jacob, embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and he kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. Who are these? They are the children God has graciously given your servant. And finally he said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Esau didn't want any of it. He forgave Jacob and welcomed him back with open arms, even though 20 years earlier he said he was going to kill him. How about that? What does that tell us? Well, in a way, that if God can forgive and bless somebody like Jacob, what more can he do for us? That he can forgive us and love us and care for us, even though we may have done some things that we shouldn't have done. Wow. Jacob had to wrestle with God both physically and spiritually. We might wrestle with God, probably not physically, but oftentimes spiritually, and wonder why. And sometimes we may never know the answer. We may never know why certain things. We just know that we live in an imperfect world where things happen. And sometimes things happen for a reason, so we can learn, that we can know better, how we can be strengthened by those things. They say that a tree that's never blown by the wind won't dig very deep roots and falls over. But if the tree is blown about by the wind, it will dig its roots deeper. And sometimes that is for us too, that those things that happen to us sometimes make us stronger and able to withstand other things as well. Well, thank you for coming. We know that God loves us and cares for us, and just continue to know that despite all the things that we may go through, that God is still there, and that we can put our faith in Him, that He will guide us, lead us, and protect us. Well, thank you all for coming. Amen.